Hello and welcome to the day ahead. It's Monday, July the 6th. I'm Andrew Gagan. Well, the local market is set to begin the week negatively, with ASX futures off by around 0.4%. Global stocks rounded out their best weekly performance in 2 months on Friday after a weak US jobs report dampened the prospects of imminent interest rate hikes that saw the US dollar ease while gold rose. US markets were closed on Friday for the Independence Day holiday, but the S&P 500 futures were up 0.3%, Nasdaq futures 1.2% higher. This week, investors will be eyeing the minutes from last month's Federal Reserve meeting, as well as earnings from Delta Airlines and Pepsi. Europe's Stock 600 index hit an intraday record high on Friday, notching up its biggest weekly jump in more than a month, underpinned by gains in cyclical stocks. German industrial group Siemens was the biggest boost to the DAX on a broker upgrade. Chip firm Extron jumped higher, along with Peers Soitec and BE Semiconductor. And defence stocks rose as Russia bombarded Ukraine with its deadliest strike this year, with investors anticipating more defence spending amid constant geopolitical tensions. Well, shipping has resumed along a US-protected corridor in the Strait of Hormuz after some vessels were forced to turn back over the weekend. While oil and gas freighter traffic continues, Western navies see the threat risk as substantial, with the centre of the strait heavily mined. On the data front, the Eurozone services industry contracted at a slower pace in June as cost pressures fell at the sharpest rate on record, thanks to falling oil prices. Whereas the UK's services sector contracted for a second month running in June, and by the most in more than 3 years, as the repercussions of the Middle East war weighed on companies. Well, the US Treasury physical market was closed for the holiday, but futures implied the 10-year yield was up 2.2 basis points. Australian 3-year government bond yield futures rose to 4.41%, the 10-year was up to 4.85%. The US dollar index was up slightly. The Aussie dollar is currently at 69.4 US cents. OPEC Plus has agreed to further increase output targets from next month, adding to global supply as oil prices are falling due to the gradual reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. The oil-producing group agreed to increase quotas by 188,000 barrels per day from August, on top of similar increases for June and July. Oil prices were little changed for the week, Brent futures settling at close to $72 a barrel. Gold rose on Friday, seeing it gain for the week after a month of declines. Spot gold up close to 1.5% at around $4,175 an ounce. Copper futures were up close to 1%. Iron ore was down slightly to $99 a tonne. And Bitcoin is currently trading at around $63,500 US dollars. Ahead this week, locally today we get the Melbourne Institute Inflation Gauge and the ANZ Indeed Job Ads Survey. Wednesday, RBA Deputy Governor Sarah Hunter talks. Overseas, tonight, EU producer prices and retail figures are released. Tuesday sees the US ISM Services Index. Wednesday, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand makes its interest rate decision. US FOMC minutes are released on Thursday, while China reveals its CPI and PPI data for June. That is your week ahead. We'll see you again tomorrow.